hello all. Thank you so much for coming down here tonight. I know some of you have come down as far as Scotland, so it's a great honour to have you here. Now, a lot of people have been complaining that we talk too much in British Freedom about the Islamic factor, but we have to talk about it because it really is the most important thing that this country is going to be facing in the next 10, 15, 20 years. And we have to face it, because if we don't, we simply won't be here in 15, 20 years' time. And this is not up for debate, this is an absolute fact. And there's a guy called James Burnham who wrote a book back in the 60s, and he talked about warfare and the point of warfare. And it's not about storming beaches, it's not about blitzkrieging across Europe. The point of war is only one thing, and that is to get political control over territory. And what we're seeing in this country now is Sharia political control incrementally taking over traditional British law, traditional British culture. And they're doing it in a way that is it's very dangerous because it's slow, but it's steady, and it's growing all the time. And we see this recently with the case of Darren Conway, who's been jailed for a year for putting up pictures of Muhammad in his windows of his house, and a few pictures of some EDL demonstrations. Now, apparently, this offended local Muslim people. And we're not allowed to offend them, because under Sharia law, you cannot offend Muslims. So this guy has now gone to jail for 12 months for offending Muslims. We saw the same thing with David Jones. I don't know if you're all aware of David Jones, is the guy that did the Fireman Sam books. I haven't seen them myself, but apparently he's quite high profile. Now he's going through Gatwick Airport, and a Muslim woman in a veil walks through security in front of him and doesn't remove her veil. He makes a tiny little remark, supposing I wore a veil and I came through here, what would you do then? He was promptly taken to one side, questioned by the security services. They called the police. The policeman that came up said, you're not allowed to say these things because times have changed, we live in a different country now. Now, this Sharia law effectively means you are not allowed to criticize Islam. Now, this guy didn't even criticize Islam, he merely offended a Muslim woman who was there at the time. Now, this creeping Sharia is something we should be really concerned about, because we're not allowed to be offended. You know, when Muslims burn poppies on Remembrance Sunday in this country, now, quite frankly, I am extremely offended by this, but there's nothing I can do about it. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't walk up to the local policeman and say, I feel very offended by this, because he won't take any notice of you, because you're not the right race, religion, colour, whatever you want to call it. You are simply a second-class citizen in your own country. The Somali girl gang that beat up a white girl and her boyfriend. He wasn't much of a boyfriend from what I could see, but maybe he had a few drinks. I think he probably had. But they kicked her around the floor, and they said, "We're going to kill the white bitch." Now that, under all of our new laws that have come in the last decade, under race and religious hatred laws, now that is immediately indictable. No, they should have been arrested, they should have been tried. Well, they were arrested, but the judge who tried them excused them because, as Muslims, they were not used to drinking, and because they were drunk, they were then allowed to walk free from the court. And this is coming down from on high. You know, this is we now have the Supreme Court in this country, which we didn't used to have. This is a European Union edict again, and the Supreme Court leader is a guy called Lord Nicholas Phillips, And Lord Nicholas Phillips actually came out 2 or 3 years ago and said, Sharia law is permissible in this country legally as long as it doesn't inflict serious physical harm. And this is coming from the guy who is the top of our legal profession, the top of our court system in this country. And this again is incremental creeping Sharia. You know, it's unbelievable, really. And this is coming down even higher up than the European Union. This comes from the United Nations. And the United Nations has within it 57 member states of an organization called the Organization of the Islamic Conference. And they have Saudi money, they have Qatari money, they have Abu Dhabi money, and they are now the people who have the largest block vote in the United Nations, and the United Nations basically do as they're told by them. So when you had someone like Ban Ki-moon, who was the Secretary General, came out over the fitna, the Geert Wilders video a couple of years ago, and he declared fitna to be a hate video. Why? Why is fitna a hate video? All Wilders did in this video was put little clips together of various Muslims and imams saying we want to take over the West, we want to do this, we want to stone women, we want to bring in the new caliphate. All he did was put these things together, but there was not a single instance of any person in those videos being tried, being prosecuted. Not one. The only person that was prosecuted was Wilders for simply putting into the public domain what these people were saying. Now this again is basically Sharia. You are not allowed to criticize Islam. By putting it out in the public domain, he was criticizing Islam. Therefore, under the United Nations, which do not really, from my point of view, exist to serve the Muslim countries, but now they do. And it goes down lower again from there, down to the European Union. Now, the founding documents of the EU Constitution make no mention of the fact that our pillars that built the European people, the culture, the countries, into what they are today, one of those founding pillars was Christianity. And I'm not a religious person, but you cannot argue that the Europe that we live in today is a Europe that was not formed by Christianity. You can't argue against this, but in the EU Constitution, no mention of it at all. What they do talk about, of course, is Islam. They talk about Islam a great deal. They want to bring in the Euro-Mediterranean alliance, which will bring in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and they want to bring this into the European Union. So we all live in this great big happy multicultural, multi-ethnic family, but we can't criticize them. Again, Sharia law, we cannot criticize them. There was a 2006 directive that came out from the European Union which only mentioned one religion again, and that religion was Islam. Not Christianity, only Islam. Not Zoroastrianism, not Buddhism, only Islam. And they have now an organization called the Monitoring Center Against Racism and Xenophobia. Now we know what that means. If you speak out against Islam, you will be prosecuted for inciting racial or religious hatred. But only against Islam, not against anything else. And then they bring in the European arrest warrant. So no matter where you actually say anything critical about Islam, I could say something in Germany next week, and a German could notify the German police. I will come back to the UK, but I can actually be extradited to Germany to stand trial for criticizing Islam. And while that is going on in this country, we have people like Abu Qatada, who can say what they like about taking over this country, but under the UN Human Rights Act, he will not be extradited. I can be extradited for criticising, he cannot. And this, again, is incremental, creeping Sharia. I'm not allowed to say anything. They can say what they like. It is Sharia law. And this really was fast-tracked by the Labour government. You know, when the Labour government came in, they did two things immediately that essentially put the future of this country into jeopardy. They brought in the Human Rights Act, and they opened the doors to mass immigration. And when these millions of people came in from all around the third world, obviously not all of them were bad people, but amongst them there were terrorists, there were paedophiles, there were criminals, and once they came in under these new Labour immigration laws, they also were not able to be thrown out again because of the European Court of Human Rights laws. So this made it a haven for people that wanted to basically overthrow our country. They were invited in, they can say what they like, and there's absolutely nothing that we could do about it. Again, creeping Sharia. And the Labour government went even further than that. They started taking people into the civil service. Derek Pasquill, I don't know if you've heard of Derek Pasquill, he was sacked from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office a few years ago. And the reason he was sacked is because he was essentially a whistleblower. He came out and he said the Foreign Office has been taken over by Islamic radicals and is now essentially a front for the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, the Labour government sacked him. They didn't take him to court, because if he'd gone to court, he would then have stood up there and said exactly what these people were doing in the Foreign Office. Now, that would have been very embarrassing for the Labour government, so they simply sacked him, told him to bugger off, and that was that. Nothing else happened after that. And a well-known journalist called Martin Bright wrote a 90-page thesis on this called When Progressives Treat with Reactionaries, which was essentially talking about liberals like Tony Blair who are being used and taken advantage of by reactionary people, i.e. liberals get fleeced by extremists. Now, this should have been something that was picked up on by the mainstream media, by the BBC, although obviously not the BBC, but it should have been. And it wasn't. And again, this is something where a well-known journalist is talking about a very serious situation where the Foreign Office has been taken over by Islamic radicals, and this is not deemed to be newsworthy. This is an astonishing situation in this country today. Impossible to think of happening 15, 20, 30 years ago, but now it happens routinely all the time.